Nathan liked starports that smelled slightly dangerous. Safe starports were full of officials, scanners, and people who asked questions that began with words like identification, destination, and purpose. Dangerous starports were much more relaxed. People were too busy surviving to worry about paperwork. The floating marketplace above Elthera qualified as extremely relaxed. Nathan leaned against a metal railing overlooking the crowded trade platforms while holding a bowl of something that had been sold to him as soup. The problem was that the soup occasionally blinked. He poked it carefully with his spoon. It blinked again. "Are you alive?" Nathan muttered. The vendor nearby shrugged without looking up. "Everything is alive if you wait long enough." Nathan stared into the bowl for a moment longer, then sighed and took another bite. He had eaten worse. Probably. The station around him hummed with the sounds of 1,000 different species doing business. Cargo drones zipped overhead. Merchant ships drifted outside the transparent shield dome like slow-moving stars. Voices in a dozen alien languages blended into one chaotic rhythm. It was exactly the kind of place where a man could disappear, which was why Nathan liked it. He had been drifting through systems like this for 15 years, small transport jobs, quiet deliveries, never staying long enough for anyone to remember his face. If someone asked too many questions, he simply left. Simple system, effective system. Unfortunately, simple systems sometimes broke. Nathan noticed the guards the moment they stepped onto the platform. They moved like gravity worked slightly differently around them, tall, calm, impossibly composed. Their armor reflected the market lights like polished silver. But the most recognizable feature was impossible to miss. Long ears, elegant and pointed, curving slightly behind their heads. Valyrians. Nathan slowly lowered his spoon. "Well," he murmured to himself, "this is probably unrelated to me." The guard stopped, directly in front of him. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "Of course it is." One of the guards stepped forward. His voice was calm and precise. "Nathan Hale." Nathan blinked. "Technically," he said carefully, "that could be someone else." The guard stared at him. Nathan sighed. "Fine, it's me." People nearby had begun pretending not to watch, which meant they were watching extremely hard. The guard activated a small holographic device. A soft light flickered across Nathan's face, scanning. "Identity confirmed." Nathan raised a finger. "Before we continue, I'd just like to say that whatever I'm being accused of, I probably didn't do it." "You are not accused of anything." Nathan frowned. "That somehow makes this worse." "The Queen of Valyria requests your presence." Nathan blinked again. "The Queen?" he repeated. "Yes." Nathan looked around the marketplace, as if hoping someone else would volunteer. No one did. "Look," Nathan said slowly, "I respect queens. Big fan of queens. Very royal. But I think there's been a mistake." "There has not." Nathan rubbed his face. He had spent 15 years avoiding attention from powerful people, and now a queen was inviting him personally. Statistically speaking, this was a terrible development. "What happens," Nathan asked cautiously, "if I say no?" The guard didn't answer. Instead, he simply gestured toward a sleek black transport ship waiting at the docking edge. Nathan stared at it. Then he looked down at his bowl of blinking soup. He placed it carefully on the railing. "Well," he said, clapping his hands once, "this feels like the beginning of a life-changing mistake." The guards escorted him through the marketplace. The crowd parted quickly. Valyrian soldiers had that effect. Nathan leaned slightly toward one of them as they walked. "Just out of curiosity," he whispered, "is this the kind of invitation where people usually come back afterward?" The guard didn't respond. "Not a great sign," Nathan muttered. The transport ship lifted smoothly into the sky, leaving the station behind. Through the window, Nathan could see the planet Elthera below, an ocean world dotted with massive floating cities that glowed like scattered constellations. Nathan whistled softly. "Okay," he admitted. "That's impressive." No one answered. The flight lasted only a few minutes before the ship descended toward a massive structure rising from the surface of the ocean. The royal palace of Valyria looked less like a building and more like a sculpted mountain of silver towers and glowing bridges. Nathan leaned back in his seat. "You know," he said casually, I usually try to avoid palaces. The guard finally glanced at him. Why? Nathan thought about that. Historically, he said, palaces tend to lead to complicated conversations. The ship landed. The doors opened. Nathan stepped out and immediately felt the quiet pressure of a place where history was being written every minute. He followed the guards through wide halls filled with light and towering windows that revealed endless ocean outside. Eventually, they stopped before enormous doors. The doors opened silently. A vast royal chamber stretched before him. At the far end stood a throne, and on that throne sat a woman. She looked almost human. Almost. Her long ears curved elegantly behind silver hair, and her posture carried a calm authority that filled the entire chamber. Nobles lined the sides of the hall, watching silently. Her eyes settled on Nathan. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the queen slowly rose from her throne. She stepped down from the platform with quiet grace and approached him. Nathan suddenly had the uncomfortable feeling that his entire life had just caught up with him. The queen stopped a few steps away. Her eyes studied his face carefully, as if searching through years of memory. Then she spoke. "Do you remember me, human?" Nathan stared at her. For a moment, the palace disappeared. In its place, he saw broken metal, burning debris, and a frightened alien girl trapped inside a crashed shuttle. 15 years vanished in a heartbeat. Nathan exhaled slowly. Then he rubbed the back of his neck and gave a tired smile. "Yeah," he said, "I remember." The silence that followed Nathan's answer was the kind that made entire governments uncomfortable. Every noble in the chamber seemed to freeze, as if the air itself had stopped moving. Nathan stood there with his hands loosely at his sides, studying the woman in front of him. 15 years had changed her, but not enough to erase the memory. The same calm eyes, the same long ears, slightly tilted back when she focused on something important. He exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, glancing around the enormous chamber, "this is definitely a bigger room than last time." Several nobles shifted in confusion. Queen Valia didn't smile immediately. She simply looked at him with the careful attention of someone verifying a memory that had lived in her mind for years. "You truly remember," she said. Nathan shrugged lightly. Hard to forget a day that starts with a shuttle falling out of the sky. The nobles along the walls exchanged uneasy looks. A human speaking so casually in front of the queen was clearly not part of their expected protocol. Valia took a slow step closer. "You stayed with me," she said quietly. Nathan tilted his head slightly. "You were bleeding in a broken cockpit, asking if you were about to die. Leaving would have been rude." One of the nobles coughed loudly in what sounded like disapproval. Nathan glanced at him. "Sorry, was there a more formal response I should have prepared 15 years ago?" Valia raised a hand gently. The murmurs in the chamber faded. Her eyes returned to Nathan. "I searched for you." Nathan blinked once. "You did what?" "For years," she said calmly. "The guards found the crash site, but the human who remained with me was gone. No identity, no records, no explanation." Nathan scratched the back of his head. "Yeah," he said. "That was intentional." More murmurs. Nathan glanced around the hall again. "I'm sensing that disappearing before royal security arrives is considered bad manners." Valia ignored the whispers of the court. "You spoke to me for hours," she continued. "You told me stories." Nathan winced slightly. "Oh no. You told me about a cargo droid that believed it was a philosopher." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "That story was terrible. It made me laugh. You had a concussion. That may have helped." A few nobles looked horrified that their queen was discussing head injuries and cargo droids in the royal chamber. Nathan looked around again. "Are they always this serious? They are used to tradition." Nathan leaned slightly toward her and whispered just loud enough for several nobles to hear. "Tradition sounds exhausting." A few guards struggled to keep their expressions neutral. Valia's lips curved into the smallest hint of amusement. "You disappeared before my rescuers arrived," she said. Nathan nodded. "Yeah. Why?" Nathan looked toward the massive windows behind the throne, where distant stars shimmered through the transparent dome of the palace. "That's a long story." "I have time." Nathan chuckled softly. "You say that now." The court waited. Nathan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Let me ask you something first, he said. Back then, did anyone explain why a diplomatic shuttle was flying low through a restricted forest at night? Valya hesitated slightly. The nobles shifted again. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I thought. The queen studied him carefully. You knew the zone was restricted? Very. And yet you were there. Nathan shrugged. I make poor life choices. Valya tilted her head slightly. You entered a restricted diplomatic zone on purpose. Nathan smiled faintly. Let's just say my job at the time involved being places I wasn't supposed to be. Several nobles stiffened, one step forward. Your Majesty, this human may be admitting to espionage. Nathan pointed at the noble. See? This is why I don't attend palace meetings. Valya raised her hand again, and the noble immediately stepped back. Her eyes returned to Nathan. You still stayed. Nathan nodded. Of course. You could have left. Nathan looked genuinely confused. You were 12. The room fell silent again. Nathan gestured casually. I'm not a monster. Valya watched him for a long moment. I remember something else, she said. Nathan looked wary. That's rarely good news. You kept talking even when I was unconscious. Nathan groaned. Oh no. You told jokes. Those were emergency morale support jokes. They were terrible. I know. You told one about a captain who tried to outsmart a navigation AI. Nathan rubbed his face. That AI had emotional issues. You laughed at your own jokes. Nathan pointed toward her. Important leadership lesson. If you tell a joke and no one laughs, laugh confidently so everyone assumes they missed something. A guard behind them quietly coughed to hide a laugh. Valya noticed. Her expression softened slightly. You said something else, she continued. Nathan squinted. That sounds dangerous. You told me I wasn't allowed to die because you had already decided the universe had enough problems. Nathan sighed heavily. Yeah, that does sound like something I'd say when I'm sleep-deprived. Valya's voice became quieter. I believed you. Nathan looked at her again. For a moment, the humor faded. Well, he said gently. Good. That was the goal. The queen straightened slightly. The court believes I brought you here to reward you. Nathan crossed his arms. You didn't? I brought you here, she said calmly, because I wanted to see if the voice I remembered still existed. Nathan thought about that. Then he shrugged. Well, unfortunately it does. A faint smile appeared on Valya's face. I can see that. Nathan looked around the enormous chamber again. So, he said cautiously, what exactly happens now? Valya turned toward the nobles. Her voice carried easily across the chamber. The human Nathan Hale will remain as my guest. Several nobles immediately began whispering. Nathan leaned slightly toward her again. Guest sounds suspiciously like person who can't leave. Valya glanced at him sideways. That depends. On? Whether you plan to disappear again. Nathan considered that. Then he sighed. You know, he said, I had a perfectly quiet life 5 hours ago. Valya began walking back toward the throne. Nathan followed, escorted by the silent guards. Behind them, the court buzzed with confusion. Nathan looked at the massive throne ahead and muttered quietly, I should have stayed with the blinking soup. Nathan spent the next hour discovering something very important about royal palaces. They were enormous, not impressively enormous, not architecturally enormous, just inconveniently enormous. He followed 2 Valyrian guards down a corridor that seemed to stretch halfway across the planet. The polished floor reflected the ceiling lights like a calm ocean, and the walls were lined with sculptures that looked extremely expensive and extremely fragile. Nathan walked carefully. You know, he said, glancing around, if someone drops a cup in here, the echo probably lasts 3 days. The guards did not react. Nathan nodded slowly. Right, silent professionals. I respect that. They passed a wide balcony overlooking the ocean below. Far beneath the palace, waves moved slowly across the surface of Elthera, like massive sheets of liquid glass. Nathan paused briefly. Okay, he admitted. This view is ridiculous. One of the guards stopped. We must continue. Nathan lifted his hands defensively. Relax. I'm not escaping. If I tried to run, I'd get lost before reaching the exit. They continued walking. Nathan noticed something else about the palace. People were staring at him. Servants, officials, soldiers, every Valyrian who passed them seemed to do a subtle double-take when they saw the human walking through the royal corridors. Nathan leaned slightly toward one of the guards. "Let me guess," he whispered. "Humans don't visit often." The guard answered without looking at him. "Never." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, so I'm either a diplomatic breakthrough or a very strange mistake." No response. They reached another corridor intersection where two palace attendants were quietly arguing over a hovering service drone that seemed to have stopped working. Nathan watched the machine for a moment as they passed. Then he casually reached out and tapped a small panel underneath it. The drone immediately hummed back to life and floated away. Both attendants stared at him. Nathan shrugged. "Restart usually works." They continued walking. After another 10 minutes, Nathan finally said what he had been thinking. "This palace is clearly designed to discourage cardio." The guard glanced back slightly. Nathan spread his hands. "Look, I'm just saying, if someone attacks the throne room, the enemy will collapse from exhaustion before reaching the queen." They stopped at a large door. The guard opened it. Inside was a surprisingly comfortable room overlooking the ocean. Nathan stepped inside slowly. He looked around. A large bed, a small table, several chairs, a wall-sized window showing the endless blue horizon of Elthera. Nathan folded his arms. "This is either a guest room," he looked back at the guards, "or a very polite prison." "You are the queen's guest." Nathan nodded slowly. "Right. That's what polite prisons are usually called." The guard stepped outside and the door slid closed. Nathan stood quietly for a moment. Then he walked to the window and leaned against the glass. The ocean stretched to the horizon in every direction. He stayed there for a while. Eventually the door opened again. Nathan didn't turn around. "Let me guess," he said. "Dinner invitation?" Queen Valya's voice answered calmly. "You assume correctly." Nathan sighed and finally turned. She stood in the doorway wearing a simpler ceremonial outfit than before, though the quiet authority around her had not changed at all. Nathan gestured around the room. "Nice place." "It is traditionally reserved for honored guests." Nathan pointed toward the door. "And the guards?" "Traditionally reserved for honored guests who may leave unexpectedly." Nathan nodded. "Fair." Valya stepped into the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nathan studied her more carefully now. She looked almost human. Almost. The long ears gave it away instantly. "You grew up?" he said. Valya raised one eyebrow slightly. "That tends to happen over 15 years. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "True. I also noticed you upgraded from crash shuttle to planetary palace." Valya walked toward the window beside him. "The universe changes quickly." Nathan looked out at the ocean again. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It does." She studied him carefully. "You disappeared because you were afraid." Nathan smiled faintly. "Afraid is a strong word." "What word would you choose?" Nathan thought for a moment. "Practical." Valya folded her hands behind her back. "You avoided being found." "Yes. You avoided every major port authority in 3 systems." Nathan blinked. "You track that?" "For 15 years." Nathan stared at her. "You have a very concerning hobby." Valya ignored the comment. "You also never remained in one place longer than a few weeks." Nathan shrugged. "I get bored." "You were running." Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. "Technically, I prefer the term strategic relocation." Valya looked amused. "You are very good at avoiding direct answers." Nathan leaned against the window frame. "Your Majesty, if I started giving direct answers to powerful rulers, my life expectancy would drop dramatically." Valya considered that. "That may be true." Nathan pointed at her. "See? You get it." For a moment the tension softened. Then Valya spoke again. "When the rescue teams arrived at the crash site, they found something strange." Nathan sighed quietly. "I had a feeling this conversation was heading there." "They found evidence that someone had repaired part of the shuttle's emergency power system." Nathan scratched his chin. "Yeah, that sounds like me." "You were not just passing through." Nathan didn't answer immediately. Outside the window, a distant cargo ship drifted slowly across the horizon. Valya watched him carefully. "You were working in the restricted zone." Nathan sighed again. Well, technically, I was working near the restricted zone. You knew exactly where the patrol routes were. Nathan looked at her. You've been reading some interesting reports. Valya's voice remained calm. You were not a random traveler. Nathan tilted his head slightly. And yet here I am. Silence lingered for a moment. Then Nathan clapped his hands once. Anyway, he said brightly, you mentioned dinner. Valya stared at him. You are avoiding the conversation again. Nathan nodded cheerfully. Yes, I'm extremely experienced at it. Valya slowly shook her head. You are nothing like the hero I imagined. Nathan pointed at himself. Thank you. That was not a compliment. I know. Nathan straightened and walked toward the door. Well, he said, shall we go meet the people who are currently debating whether I'm a spy, a criminal, or a very confusing guest? Valya followed him. They are debating all three. Nathan smiled slightly. Good. That means I'm making a strong first impression. Nathan had attended many strange meals in his life. Cargo crews celebrating questionable profits, smugglers arguing over navigation routes, engineers debating whether a reactor leak counted as mildly concerning. But he had never attended a royal dinner. Within 3 minutes, he concluded something important. Royal dinners were terrifying. The dining chamber looked large enough to host a small fleet. A long table stretched through the center like a polished runway, covered with shining dishes and hovering light orbs that gently illuminated the room. Nathan stopped at the doorway. Is this dinner, he asked quietly, or a diplomatic ambush? Queen Valya walked beside him. It is dinner. Nathan looked at the long rows of nobles already seated at the table. Right, of course it is. The nobles were watching him the way scientists might watch an unfamiliar alien species, which Nathan realized was technically accurate. He stepped into the room. Every conversation stopped. Nathan leaned slightly toward Valya. Just out of curiosity, if I trip and fall here, does it start an interstellar incident? Valya didn't look at him. Possibly. Nathan nodded slowly. Good to know. They reached the center of the table. Servants moved quietly around them, placing dishes with careful precision. Nathan sat down and immediately noticed something else. Every utensil looked extremely complicated. There were at least 8 different forks. Nathan stared at them. This is aggressive, he muttered. Valya noticed. You're confused. Nathan pointed at the arrangement. There are too many forks. They serve different courses. Nathan sighed. In my experience, food requires 1 fork, maybe 2 if things get ambitious. Across the table, a tall noble with elaborate silver robes spoke carefully. Human customs appear simple. Nathan looked at him. That's a polite way of saying primitive, isn't it? The noble hesitated. Nathan grinned. Don't worry, you're not wrong. Servants placed the first course in front of them, a glowing dish filled with thin slices of something that shimmered faintly blue. Nathan studied it. It's moving. It is alive, Valya said calmly. Nathan leaned closer. Are we negotiating with it before eating? A guard at the far wall coughed quietly. Valya's expression remained composed. It is a traditional dish. Nathan carefully picked up one of the forks. Of course it is. He took a bite. He froze. Everyone at the table watched him. Nathan slowly chewed. Then he nodded thoughtfully. Okay. Several nobles leaned forward slightly. Nathan raised a finger. I was expecting worse. The tension around the table shifted slightly. A few nobles looked confused. Valya continued eating calmly. After a moment, she spoke. My advisors believe you may have hidden motives. Nathan pointed his fork toward them. Excellent instincts. Several nobles stiffened. Nathan took another bite. My hidden motive, he continued, is finishing dinner without causing a diplomatic crisis. The noble in silver robes frowned. You speak very casually in the presence of a queen. Nathan nodded. That's because I'm terrible at formal behavior. Valya glanced at him. That much is obvious. Nathan leaned back slightly in his chair. You should see me at military briefings. I once asked if the enemy fleet had considered apologizing. A servant accidentally dropped a utensil. The sound echoed across the room. Nathan raised his hands defensively. See? Even the forks are nervous. Valya looked down briefly, clearly hiding amusement. Another noble spoke from the far end of the table. You claim to have been present at the princess's crash 15 years ago. Nathan nodded. Correct. You also admit to operating inside restricted territory. Nathan lifted another fork. Technically adjacent territory. That distinction is meaningless. Nathan shrugged. Lawyers love it. The noble leaned forward. Why should this court trust you? Nathan thought about that. Then he pointed gently toward Valya. She already answered that. Every eye turned to the queen. Valya continued eating calmly for a moment before speaking. 15 years ago, when my shuttle crashed, this human remained beside me until rescue arrived. Nathan lifted his glass. Technically, I stayed because leaving you alone would have been a terrible first impression. Several nobles exchanged glances. Nathan looked around the table. Also, she had a broken leg and a concussion. Running away would have been extremely rude. The silver-robed noble frowned. You expect us to believe you risked exposure for simple kindness? Nathan blinked. Yes. Silence spread across the table again. Nathan slowly looked around. Oh. He leaned toward Valya and whispered. That's not common here, is it? Valya answered quietly. Not in restricted diplomatic zones. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Fair point. Another course arrived. This one looks safer. Nathan sighed with relief. Finally, something that isn't blinking. Valya glanced at the dish. It reacts to temperature. Nathan stared at it. Of course it does. The nobles watched as Nathan cautiously poked the food with a fork. It changed color instantly. Nathan leaned back. I don't trust it. Valya finally allowed herself a small smile. You repaired the power system of a crashed shuttle, but you fear dinner. Nathan pointed at the plate. That shuttle wasn't trying to change color. A quiet laugh escaped from one of the younger nobles. Everyone turned to stare at him. The young noble quickly looked down. Nathan leaned toward him. Don't worry, he whispered. If anyone asks, blame the blinking soup. Valya placed her fork down. The room gradually quieted. Then she spoke calmly. Nathan Hale will remain in the palace. Murmurs immediately spread around the table. Nathan raised his glass. To poor life decisions? Valya glanced at him. You are not helping. Nathan smiled slightly. Your Majesty, I am helping by being honest. The nobles continued whispering. Nathan looked around the enormous chamber again. He leaned toward Valya. I should warn you about something. What? Nathan sighed. Whenever powerful people decide to keep me nearby, something usually goes wrong. Valya studied him carefully. Do you believe something will go wrong here? Nathan took a slow sip from his glass. Then he smiled faintly. Oh, he said quietly. I'm absolutely certain of it. Nathan woke to the sound of something humming loudly above his head. He opened one eye. A small spherical drone floated near the ceiling, projecting a soft beam of scanning light that moved slowly across the room like a lazy lighthouse. Nathan stared at it for a few seconds. Then he sat up. Good morning, he said to the drone. Are you spying on me or diagnosing me? The drone beeped politely. Nathan nodded. Right. Helpful answer. He leaned back against the headboard and stretched. The bed was far more comfortable than the bunks on cargo freighters, which immediately made him suspicious. Comfort was dangerous. Comfort meant staying. Staying meant people asking questions. The drone floated closer and scanned his arm. Nathan frowned. You know, he said, most people knock before medical examinations. The drone beeped again. Nathan sighed. Fine. If you find anything alarming, please wait until after breakfast. The drone drifted away and exited through the open doorway. Nathan sat there for a moment. Then he rubbed his face and stood up. The window showed the ocean again, endless and calm, broken only by the distant silhouettes of floating cities and passing starships descending through the atmosphere. Nathan leaned against the glass. Well, he murmured, still not dead. A voice behind him answered calmly. That is usually considered a positive start to the day. Nathan turned. Queen Valya stood in the doorway. Nathan blinked. You know, he said, your palace security is terrible. Valya raised an eyebrow. You were aware of the drone? Sure, Nathan said. But the queen walking into my room before breakfast? That's a security nightmare. Valya stepped inside. You are my guest. Nathan nodded. That's what worries me. She walked toward the window beside him. For a moment they both looked out over the ocean. Nathan broke the silence first. So, he said, what's today's royal schedule? Assassination attempts? Political conspiracies? Awkward breakfast meetings? Valya considered the list. Breakfast, Nathan pointed. Called it. They walked through the palace corridors again, though this time Nathan noticed something different. People were still staring, but now some of them whispered. Nathan leaned slightly toward Valya. I think your court believes I'm either a spy or a miracle, Valya answered calmly. They are still deciding. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. I hope they pick miracle. The paperwork is probably easier. They entered a smaller dining room overlooking a cluster of landing platforms where sleek starships arrived and departed in slow, elegant patterns. Nathan sat down. This room is less terrifying. It is a private chamber. Nathan looked relieved. Excellent. Fewer witnesses if I misuse the forks. A servant placed breakfast on the table. This time the food did not blink, glow, or attempt to escape. Nathan relaxed slightly. Progress. Valya studied him while he ate. You adapt quickly. Nathan shrugged. I've visited stranger places. Such as? Nathan thought for a moment. Once I delivered cargo to a mining station built inside a hollow asteroid. That does not sound unusual. The asteroid occasionally rotated the wrong direction. Valya paused. That sounds extremely dangerous. Nathan nodded. The captain insisted it built character. Valya looked unconvinced. Nathan took another bite. So, he said casually, when do your advisors start interrogating me? They already have. Nathan stopped chewing. What? Valya nodded toward the wall. Nathan followed her gaze. A decorative panel slid open slightly, revealing a tiny hovering surveillance unit. Nathan stared at it. Then he slowly raised his hand and waved. Good morning, mysterious listeners. The panel quickly closed. Nathan leaned back in his chair. I knew it. Valya looked calm. They are cautious. Nathan pointed toward the wall. That device has been recording me since breakfast started, hasn't it? Yes, Nathan sighed. Wonderful. Somewhere in the palace, there's a group of nervous officials reviewing footage of me arguing with Soup. Valya almost smiled. You repaired a shuttle power core with improvised tools. Nathan raised a finger. Improvised tools and panic. You kept a wounded princess conscious for hours. I also told a story about a heroic sandwich. That story worked. Nathan shrugged. Greatest sandwich in galactic history. Valya leaned forward slightly. You underestimate the effect you had. Nathan met her eyes. Your Majesty, 15 years ago, I found a scared kid in a wrecked ship. That's the entire story. You stayed. Nathan sighed. Yes. You could have left. Nathan pointed at her again. You were 12. That did not require you to remain. Nathan leaned back in his chair. For a moment, the humor faded. I don't leave people behind. The words hung in the room quietly. Valya studied him carefully. That is why I searched for you. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. That seems like a lot of effort for one random human. You were not random. Nathan opened his mouth to respond. Before he could speak, a distant alarm echoed through the palace. Both of them looked toward the window. Outside, several defense drones suddenly launched from the palace towers. Nathan stood immediately. Well, he said calmly, there it is. Valya turned toward him. There is what? Nathan folded his arms and watched the sky. The part where something goes wrong. The alarm echoed through the palace with a steady pulse that sounded far too confident for Nathan's comfort. He stood by the window watching the defense drones streak into the sky like metallic birds. Nathan folded his arms. Well, he said calmly, that escalated quickly. Valya was already moving toward the doorway. Security will report within seconds. Nathan followed her into the corridor. Do they normally launch half the palace into the sky during breakfast? Only when necessary. Nathan nodded. Encouraging. Guards were already moving through the halls with precise speed. Unlike the tense nobles Nathan had met the night before, these soldiers moved like professionals who had rehearsed every possible disaster. Nathan stepped aside as several rushed past. Everyone here is extremely organized, he muttered. That usually means the problem is very large. Valya glanced at him. You are unusually calm. Nathan shrugged. I once watched a cargo ship accidentally jump to hyperspace while still attached to a docking station. That sounds catastrophic. It was, Nathan said, but it also sets a high standard for chaos. A guard approached quickly and bowed. Your Majesty, unidentified ships have entered upper atmosphere. Nathan nodded immediately. Yep, that'll do it. Valya spoke calmly. How many? 3. Nathan tilted his head. That's not terrible. The guard looked confused. Nathan clarified. If it was 12, we'd be having a much worse morning. Valya walked toward a nearby command chamber, Nathan following behind her. Inside, a massive holographic display filled the center of the room. The ocean surface of Elthera glowed beneath a map of orbital space, where several blinking indicators showed approaching vessels. Nathan leaned closer to the display. 3 angular ships hovered just beyond the defense perimeter. Nathan squinted. Those are ugly. Valya glanced at him. You recognize the design? Nathan rubbed his chin. Not exactly, but I've spent enough time around smugglers to recognize ships that don't care about diplomatic invitations. A commander stepped forward. They have not responded to communications. Nathan nodded. That's another classic sign. Valya studied the display. They are approaching slowly. Nathan leaned against the table. That means they want attention. Or they are cautious. Nathan shook his head. No, cautious ships stay outside sensor range. He pointed at the blinking indicators. These ships want us to notice them. The commander looked skeptical. You speak with surprising confidence for a drifter. Nathan grinned. Professional experience avoiding people with ships like those. Valya looked back at the display. What do you think they want? Nathan shrugged. If I had to guess? He pointed again. Conversation. The commander frowned. Armed ships do not arrive for conversation. Nathan raised a finger. Oh, they absolutely do. Explain. Nathan gestured at the display. 3 ships is not an invasion. It's a statement. Valya looked thoughtful. What kind of statement? Nathan smiled faintly. The kind that starts with, we need to talk, and ends with someone threatening to blow up a moon. One of the officers coughed. Valya crossed her arms. You sound very familiar with this behavior. Nathan leaned back slightly. That's because I've seen it before. The commander activated another scan. These ships carry heavy weapons. Nathan nodded. Of course they do. Valya turned toward him. Why do you sound unsurprised? Nathan pointed toward the sky. Because 15 years of hiding teaches you something important. What? Nathan sighed. If trouble ever finds you again. He gestured at the display. It usually arrives in very expensive spacecraft. The alarm tone shifted slightly as the holographic display updated. One of the approaching ships suddenly powered up its external transmitters. The commander turned toward the communication console. They are opening a channel. Valya stepped forward. Put it through. The holographic display flickered. A distorted transmission signal appeared in the center of the room. Nathan folded his arms again. Here comes the part where someone makes a dramatic speech. The image stabilized. A figure appeared on the hologram, its features partially hidden behind a metallic breathing mask. The voice that followed was deep and mechanical. Queen Valya of Elthera. Valya stood calmly. You have entered restricted space. Identify yourself. Nathan leaned slightly toward one of the officers. I give it 30 seconds before someone says something threatening. The voice continued. We are not your enemies. Nathan whispered quietly. 20 seconds. The masked figure continued speaking. We are here for the human. Every head in the room turned toward Nathan. Nathan slowly raised both hands. Okay, he said. That part I did not expect. The room stayed silent after the transmission ended. Nathan slowly lowered his hands. Well, he said, this is awkward. Every officer in the command chamber was staring at him. The holographic display still showed the 3 ships hovering calmly above the ocean, like patient predators. Valya turned toward him. You know them. Nathan rubbed his face. I was hoping that part wouldn't be obvious. The commander stepped forward. You will explain. Nathan nodded slowly. Yeah, that's fair. He walked closer to the display, studying the ship signatures again. Those aren't pirates, he said. They're contractors. Contractors? One officer repeated. Nathan gestured toward the ships. The kind hired when someone wants a problem solved quietly. Valya's voice remained calm. And you are the problem? Nathan exhaled. Technically, yes. The commander frowned. You said you were a drifter. Nathan looked back at him. I am. That is not the full truth. Nathan shrugged. I used to work for a reconnaissance unit, human intelligence division. Nothing glamorous. Mostly observation missions in places we weren't supposed to be. Valya watched him closely. You disappeared after one mission? Nathan nodded. That mission? He pointed toward the ships. The unit collapsed after some political decisions went sideways. A few people decided it would be easier if certain witnesses vanished. And you ran, Valya said quietly. Nathan smiled faintly. I prefer tactical relocation. The commander crossed his arms. They followed you for 15 years? Nathan shook his head. No, I stayed invisible for 15 years. He pointed again at the ships. They only found me after I walked into a palace and said hello to a queen. One officer muttered something under his breath. Nathan sighed. I know. Terrible timing. Valya looked toward the holographic display. They want you returned. Nathan nodded. Alive if possible. Quietly if convenient. And if we refuse? Nathan glanced at the ships again. Then they become very persuasive. The room fell quiet again. Finally, Valya spoke. They cannot simply take someone from my palace? Nathan tilted his head. That's nice to hear. She turned to the commander. Prepare a communication channel. Nathan blinked. Wait. Valya looked at him. You intend to negotiate? Nathan shook his head. No, I intend to leave. The commander stared at him. You will surrender? Nathan laughed softly. Not exactly. He pointed toward the ships. Those people aren't here for war. They're here for a target. He tapped his chest. If the target disappears again, their job becomes impossible. Valya studied him. You plan to run? Nathan nodded. Worked for 15 years. You would leave again. Nathan shrugged lightly. That was always the plan. Valya stepped closer to him. You said you do not leave people behind. Nathan hesitated. That's different. How? Nathan looked around the room, then back toward the stars beyond the palace window. Because this time, staying would start a war. The commander suddenly spoke. They are charging weapons. Nathan sighed. Right on schedule. The holographic display lit up with warning indicators. Valya looked toward the officers. Hold fire. Then she turned back to Nathan. You spent 15 years running because you believed your existence could cause conflict. Nathan nodded. Yes. You hid from every government. Yes. You lived alone. Nathan shrugged. I met some interesting cargo drones. Valya stepped closer. And yet when a child was dying in a crashed shuttle, you stayed. Nathan didn't answer. Valya's voice softened slightly. You did not run that day. Nathan exhaled slowly. No. Why? Nathan looked down for a moment. Then he answered quietly. Because someone needed help. Valya nodded once. Exactly. She turned toward the command console. Open the channel. The masked figure appeared again. Queen Valya. Valya stood tall. You have entered my world demanding the surrender of a guest. He belongs to us. Nathan muttered quietly. That's debatable. Valya continued calmly. This human saved my life when I was a child. The masked figure did not react. He is a fugitive. Valya's voice remained steady. He is under my protection. The room waited. The masked figure finally spoke again. Then you choose conflict. Nathan leaned toward the console. Hey! Everyone looked at him. Nathan waved casually at the hologram. Let me save everyone some time. The masked figure tilted his head. Nathan pointed toward the ships. You tracked me for 15 years and still didn't find me. Silence. Nathan smiled slightly. Imagine how hard it'll be if I actually try. Valya watched him. Nathan turned toward her. I'm not running anymore. The words surprised even him. He looked back at the hologram. You want me? He spread his hands. Come get me. The masked figure hesitated. Valya spoke calmly. Defense fleet, Activate perimeter. Outside the palace windows, dozens of defense drones ignited and rose into the sky. The three hostile ships paused. Then slowly their engines powered down. The transmission flickered once. We will withdraw. The hologram vanished. The ships turned and accelerated back toward orbit. Silence filled the command chamber. Nathan watched them disappear into the clouds. Then he leaned against the console. Well, he said, that could have gone worse. The commander looked stunned. You challenged them. Nathan shrugged. They weren't expecting resistance. Valya studied him quietly. You chose to stay. Nathan scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, about that. He looked around the palace. The ocean beyond the window stretched endlessly under the morning light. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't feel the urge to leave. Nathan sighed. Turns out running gets exhausting. Valya stepped beside him. You have a place here. Nathan looked at her. The court will hate that. They will adapt. Nathan smiled faintly. Your Majesty. Yes. Nathan gestured toward the sky where the ships had vanished. Next time someone asks if I remember them? Valya raised an eyebrow. Nathan chuckled. I'm saying no.